So, Chapter 13 talks about public order crimes. Public order crimes are violations of law that that challenge the general well-being of society and its moral principles. We often refer to these as victimless crimes. Some examples may be, somebody using drugs inside of their home, or smoking marijuana, or prostitution. Some things where there's not a clear victim are what we would refer to as victimless crimes or sometimes public order crimes. So the question whenever we talk about public order crimes is, what's the social harm? So whenever we look at social harm, that's the injury that's caused to others by the wrongful conduct. So acts that cause harm or injury are outlawed and punished as crimes. Acts, even those that are vulgar, offensive, and depraved, are not outlawed or punished if there is no harm to no one. So whenever we look at the social harm, or when we look at a public order violation, or if something is against the law, we have to look at who was harmed or what happened. So victimless crimes sometimes is a misnomer, because the argument can be made that someone along the way was harmed by the drug use, or that it's causing a burden to society, and that there is a victim. It's just not as clear as a murder victim. So to talk about moral crusaders really quick, this is just a little interesting to me. So every year, the American Library Association puts books out that are challenged by critics that are considered to be too inappropriate. And most of you have probably read like the Harry Potter series. That was one that the Moral Crusader said was not appropriate because it had Satanism and witchcraft in it. Another one that I read was J.C. Dugard, A Stolen Life. Well, if you'll remember, J.C. Dugard was the child who was kidnapped when she was 11 and held captive for 18 years. So it was actually just her story about what happened, how she experienced, and how she was rescued. It was her biography, but the Moral Crusaders out there said nope, not appropriate. So just a little information for you there. So speaking of J.C. Dugard, so some of the public order crimes have clear victims, and sex-related offenses typically do, right? These are not under the category of victimless crimes. These have clear victims, and as I was just referring to, J.C. Lee Dugard was, kidnapped. Same thing with Elizabeth Smart. All of these women were kidnapped and then, forced into sexual acts. Due to their kidnapper, whatever their kidnapper had required of them. So I'm not going to go through all of the different types of, sexual pedophilia and paraphilias, but I will just talk about pedophilia real quick, just because that's the one that we seem to have the most contact with, or most conversations about. By definition, pedophilia is just attaining sexual pleasure through sexual activity with a prepubescent child. So we're talking, a young girl or boy who has not gone through puberty yet. And again, these are public order crimes because they violate the moral standards. Again, I need you to understand that I'm not teaching that this is a victimless crime. There are victimless public order crimes. Pedophilia is not one that I would say there is no victim to. So, pedophilia is the most probably concerning to the general public. Men and women both participate. As far as the causes, there's different theories, and if you're interested, you can spend some more time on those. But essentially, some of them say that there's an abnormality in the brain, or they've been exposed to it, or you've heard of like the cycle of violence. There's a saying, hurt people hurt people. So pedophilia, sometimes you see someone who is participating in those acts with children had that happen to them in their childhood. And that's important for us to know, because in times where we need to talk about punishing and protecting society, one of the things that we need to figure out is how we can protect children from crimes, kidnapping, but also the sex-related crimes that pedophiles are committing. So prostitution, this is one that would fall under what some people would argue is a victimless crime. And we'll get into that a little bit more here in a second. But prostitution, by definition, the granting of non-marital sex or sexual access in exchange for money or a transaction. Something's being exchanged. And it's, the key part there that it's a non-marital sex. So it's not talking about sex between spouses. Prostitution's been around for the beginning of time. This is not a new idea or a new practice. However, there are fewer than 50,000 arrests made annually, even though we know that prostitution is pretty common. And part of that is that some officers just aren't arresting the way they used to for prostitution. Prostitution abroad in other countries is very lucrative business. Billions of dollars worldwide would be generated through prostitution. So types of prostitutes, you can read through your text and get a much greater definition here, but streetwalkers, those are, kind of the bottom of the barrel as far as prostitutes go. So those are the ones that you would see that are literally out on the street. As compared to call girls or escort services, these are the ones that are more regulated, have a better business plan. They may have somebody that's helping them. They may have pimps. These are the ones that cost a lot of money, and so they are your, quote, higher class prostitutes. But it's important to think to pay attention to what we refer to as e-hookers, but this means that they don't even have to be present on the street or in a brothel or in an escort service. Even they can advertise online and meet without even having to actually be out and face to face until that initial meeting. So the internet has increased the presence of prostitution. So when we talk about if prostitution is truly a victimless crime, the argument is, should it be legalized? Should two consenting adults be able to, engage in a sexual act and exchange money or goods, whatever they do? It is a misdemeanor punishable by jail or fine or jail sentence. But some of the concerns are that there is a lot of abuse present within the prostitution rings, long-lasting victimization, meaning that the prostitutes may have a long, difficult recovery from some of the things they've experienced while working as a prostitute. The level of harassment and exploitation is high. And finally, how many of the prostitutes are actually raped? We've talked about rape in multiple different classes, but if that woman doesn't really want to have sex, or if she changes her mind in the middle of this transaction, how many prostitutes are truly raped, and how many are exploited by pimps or by wealthy men, or it seems like a really dangerous situation for prostitutes to be in, and I've had prostitutes on my caseload in the prison. I've talked to a lot of them, and some of the stories that you'll hear you'll bring tears to your eyes, just because not that they necessarily enjoyed the work, but rather they felt like they had no other options because they were addicted to drugs and alcohol, or they were uneducated. I'm thinking of one woman who had like a third grade education. Well, she didn't know how to work a computer or have a cell phone or any of those things. So what type of legal employment did she really have available to her in her narrow view of the world? The answer was not much. So prostitution was the path that she chose. And she had like 8 children due to her job. So all 8 were obviously adopted out and put into foster homes, or were in the process of being. But not to put bias into your heads by any means, but is prostitution a victimless crime? Definitely the case can be made to say yes. However, I would say there are some victims out there that maybe we overlook, and whether that's the prostitute themselves or the children of the prostitutes, I think that there are many times in which somebody is injured or sustains an injury or becomes a victim as a result of prostitution. So the rest of this hopefully won't take quite as long as the first, but pornography. I assume that you all are familiar with the definition of pornography, but if not, here it is for you. Explicit books, magazines, films, DVDs, websites. Pornography itself is not illegal, but pornography can quickly become illegal if it is not completed, and I hate to say like legally, but really that's it. You can't have an underground pornography ring. You need to actually be a legitimate business with oversight. And when we talk about pornography, one of the major things that we need to pay attention to is the fact that a large number of underage children are filmed for pornography, and it and whether or not they are intended to look like children, or if they're trying to find the youngest looking women that they can. It's a very fine line, and the act of child pornography is highly illegal. So pornography is one of those moral questionable behaviors, right? And then it can quickly become a public order crime whenever it crosses over into illegal pornography. And then it becomes far from a victimless crime whenever we're talking about involving children in pornography. So it can kind of run the gamut there between legal to questionable to highly illegal. So substance abuse. Substance abuse is, really important for us to think about and to look at as far as criminology. The majority of people who are in prison admit to being high or intoxicated while they committed their crime. And many of those crimes are committed to gain access to alcohol and or drugs. So So here's a graph here. This is in your textbook on page 467 if you wanted to look at it closer. But essentially it's just showing the amount and who's using drugs and what drugs are using, according to the survey. It's estimated that 1 in 20 adults, or 250 million people between the ages of 15 and 64, used an illegal drug in the last year. So the presence and the prevalence of drug use is high. Causes. So why are people using substances? First off, I would argue that there's not one single cause, as you see here at the bottom. Many people believe that as well, but rather it is a combination of different things that are going on in a person's life. So subcultural view, racial prejudice, where they were born, raised, how they're living, their economic status, can all impact their reasons to abuse drugs. Psychological view just means that we believe that some people are just more likely to be intoxicated and enjoy that intoxication. The genetic factors, we were talking about the cycle of violence earlier. Same thing, an alcoholic child, or if a child has an alcoholic parent, they are more likely to become alcoholics as an adult. Social learning, they watch their parents do it. Problem behavior syndrome just means that people that PBS are maladjusted. They're not coping in society. They're not functioning the way quote normal people do. So therefore they become alienated or distressed. And then rational choice. It's pretty self-explanatory. People make a rational choice because they enjoy getting high. And they want to continue to do so.